The evening air was crisp as Maya stepped out of her old Honda Civic, adjusting her black uniform one last time before walking toward the massive iron gates. The mansion before her looked like something from a movie, all glass and marble with perfectly manicured gardens that probably cost more than most people's cars. She took a deep breath, grabbed her small bag from the passenger seat, and started the long walk up the winding driveway. This wasn't just any house. This was the home of Richard Sterling, the tech billionaire who'd made headlines for buying entire city blocks and turning them into luxury developments. Tonight was his 45th birthday party, and Maya was one of 20 servers hired to make sure. His wealthy friends had everything they needed. She'd been working for elite catering for 8 months now, ever since she'd graduated from the music conservatory and realized that a degree in piano performance didn't exactly pay the bills. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, someone who'd spent 12 years studying classical music, about to serve drinks to people who probably spent more on a single bottle of wine than she made in a month. But rent was due in 2 weeks, her student loan payment was coming up, and her mom back in Ohio was still struggling with medical bills. So here she was, trading her dreams for a steady paycheck, at least for now. As she approached the service entrance, Maya could already hear the sounds of the party. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the gentle hum of expensive conversations. The catering manager, Mrs. Chun, was waiting by the kitchen door with a clipboard and a stressed expression that Maya had learned meant it was going to be a long night. "Maya, perfect timing," Mrs. Chun said, checking her watch. "The guests started arriving 30 minutes ago, and Mr. Sterling wants everything to be absolutely perfect tonight. You'll be working the main ballroom, champagne, appetizers, and make sure you smile. These people tip well when they're happy." Maya nodded and tied her apron around her waist. She'd done this dance dozens of times before at other wealthy parties around the city. The routine was always the same: be polite, be invisible, and don't take anything personally when the guests treated you like furniture. She'd learned to tune out the conversations about their third homes in the Hamptons or their kids' private school tuition that cost more than her annual salary. The mansion's interior was even more impressive than the outside. The main ballroom had 20-foot ceilings, crystal chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a palace, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a perfect view of the city skyline. In the center of the room sat a stunning black grand piano, a Steinway. Maya noticed immediately. Her fingers itched just looking at it. She wondered when it had last been played, or if it was just another expensive decoration in a house full of them. The guests were exactly what Maya had expected: men in custom suits that probably cost more than her car, women in designer dresses, with jewelry that sparkled under the chandelier light, and everyone holding cocktails that cost $50 a glass. They moved through the room in small groups, their conversations a mixture of business deals, vacation plans, and casual mentions of purchases that would change most people's lives. Maya picked up her tray of champagne flutes and began making her rounds. The first group she approached was discussing their latest art acquisitions. A woman with perfectly styled silver hair was explaining how she'd just bought a painting at auction for $2 million, describing it as a steal, because the artist's other works were selling for much more. Maya offered them fresh glasses of champagne, and they took them without even looking at her, continuing their conversation as if she wasn't there. This was always the hardest part of these jobs, the way wealthy people looked right through service workers. Maya had gotten used to being treated like she was invisible, but it still stung sometimes. She remembered her music professor telling her that music was about connection, about touching people's hearts and souls. Here, she was just another pair of hands making sure the champagne glasses stayed full. As she moved through the crowd, Maya couldn't help but overhear fragments of conversations that revealed just how different this world was from hers. A man near the windows was complaining about the renovation costs for his vacation home. Apparently, $300,000 was more than he'd expected to spend on a guest bathroom. A group of women by the fireplace were discussing their children's summer plans, casually mentioning camps that cost more than many people's yearly salaries. The most surreal moment came when she passed a group of men discussing their latest business venture. They were talking about buying a small town's water rights, and one of them joked about how the locals probably wouldn't even notice the increase in their bills. Maya felt her stomach tighten at the casual way they discussed something that would affect thousands of families, but she kept walking. Her expression neutral throughout the evening, Maya found herself stealing glances at the piano. It was positioned perfectly in the room, clearly meant to be a centerpiece, but no one seemed to pay any attention to it. She wondered about its history. Had it been custom-made for this room? Did anyone in the Sterling family actually play? The keys looked pristine, barely touched, which made her heart ache a little. Such a beautiful instrument, sitting silent in a room full of noise. The party was in full swing when Richard Sterling himself made his entrance. Maya had seen him in business magazines and on television, but seeing him in person was different. He was tall and commanding, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He moved through the crowd like he owned not just the room but everyone in it, accepting birthday wishes and handshakes with the casual grace of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. Maya watched him from across the room as she refilled champagne glasses. He was in his element, surrounded by other wealthy and powerful people who spoke his language of investments and acquisitions. She noticed how he commanded attention without even trying, how conversations seemed to revolve around him naturally. This was his world, and everyone else was just visiting. As the evening progressed, Maya began to feel the familiar weight of exhaustion that came with these high-end catering jobs. Not physical exhaustion, she was used to being on her feet for hours, but emotional exhaustion. There was something draining about spending evening after evening in the presence of such casual wealth, watching people spend more on a single dinner than she made in a week, all while she smiled and served and pretended not to notice the vast gulf between their lives and hers. She thought about her apartment back in the city, a tiny studio with thin walls and a heating system that barely worked in winter. She thought about her mother, who was still paying off medical bills from her cancer treatment 2 years ago. She thought about her dreams of performing on stage, of sharing her music with the world, dreams that felt further away with each passing day. But Maya also thought about why she was here. Every dollar she made tonight was a dollar closer to financial stability, a dollar that would help her support her mother and maybe, eventually, give her the freedom to pursue her music again. She'd learned to find strength in the temporary nature of these jobs. They were just stepping stones, not her destination. As she prepared for another round of champagne service, Maya straightened her shoulders and put on her professional smile. She had no idea that this particular evening would be different from all the others, that in just a few hours her life would change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The party had been going smoothly for about 2 hours when Maya noticed Richard Sterling watching her. At first she thought it was just coincidence. Maybe he was looking at something behind her or checking to see if the guests in her section needed anything. But as she moved around the room, she kept catching his eye, and there was something in his expression that made her uncomfortable. Maya had learned to read people during her months of catering work. Most wealthy guests fell into predictable categories: the ones who were polite but distant, the ones who completely ignored the staff, and the ones who were genuinely kind. But then there were the others, the ones who seemed to find entertainment in making service workers uncomfortable. She was beginning to suspect that Richard Sterling might be one of those people. She was refilling water glasses at a table near the windows when she heard Sterling's voice getting louder. He was telling a story to a group of about 10 people, something about a business deal that had gone wrong because the other party didn't know their place. The way he said it, with a slight smirk, made Maya's skin crawl. She tried to focus on her work, but she could feel his attention on her again. "You know what I love about these parties?" Sterling said, his voice carrying across the room. "You get to see all kinds of people, the ones who belong here and the ones who—" He paused dramatically. "Well, the ones who don't." A few people chuckled, though Maya noticed that some of the guests looked uncomfortable. She kept her head down and continued with her duties, hoping the moment would pass. But Sterling wasn't done. "Take our lovely server over there. he continued, and Maya felt her heart sink as she realized he was talking about her. I heard from a catering manager that she's got some kind of musical background. Apparently she went to music school or something like that. Maya's cheeks burned as she felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She set down the water pitcher carefully, trying to keep her hands steady. How did he know about her education? Had Mrs. June mentioned it to him? Maya had specifically asked the catering company not to share personal information about their workers. Isn't that interesting? Sterling continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Here we have someone who thought she was going to be a big shot musician, and now she's serving drinks at my party. I bet she's got all sorts of stories about her dreams and ambitions. The room was getting quieter now, and Maya could feel the tension building. Some of the guests were looking away, clearly uncomfortable with where this was going. Others seemed curious, as if they were watching a show they couldn't quite decide whether to enjoy or not. Maya tried to move toward the kitchen, hoping to escape the situation, but Sterling's voice stopped her. "Oh, don't leave now," he said, his tone becoming more commanding. "I was just thinking, since you're here, and since we have this beautiful piano that never gets played, maybe you'd like to give us a little performance? I'm sure everyone would love to hear what a real music school education sounds like." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Maya felt her face getting hotter, and she could hear her heart pounding in her ears. Around the room, conversations had stopped entirely. Even the catering staff had paused in their work to see what would happen next. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," Maya managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here to work, not to perform." But Sterling wasn't about to let it go. "Oh, come on," he said, spreading his arms wide as if he was being generous. "Don't be shy. I bet you've been looking at that piano all night, wishing you could play it. Here's your chance." Maya felt trapped. She knew that refusing too strongly could cost her this job, and she needed the money. But she also knew that Sterling wasn't making this offer out of kindness. This was about power, about putting her in her place and entertaining his guests at her expense. "I really should get back to work," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Sterling's expression changed slightly, becoming more predatory. "You know what? I insist. As the host of this party, I'm officially inviting you to play. In fact, I'm curious to see if that expensive education was worth anything." The cruelty in his voice was becoming more obvious now. Maya could see some of the guests shifting uncomfortably, but no one was speaking up to stop what was happening. She realized that, to them, she was just part of the evening's entertainment, no different from the flower arrangements or the expensive wine. "I'm sure it won't be anything too complicated," Sterling continued, his voice getting louder. "Maybe something simple, something that matches your current situation. I mean, we wouldn't want you to embarrass yourself by trying something too difficult, would we?" Maya felt something inside her break. The casual cruelty of his words, the way he was treating her education and her dreams like a joke, the way the entire room was watching her humiliation like it was a performance, it was too much. She looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Some looked embarrassed for her, others seemed curious about what would happen next, and a few appeared to be enjoying the spectacle. She thought about all the time she'd been treated like she was invisible. All the conversations she'd overheard about casual purchases that cost more than she made in a year, all the moments when she'd felt like she didn't belong in these spaces. But then she thought about something else. She thought about the countless hours she'd spent practicing, the sacrifices her mother had made to pay for her lessons, the professors who had believed in her talent. She thought about the music that lived inside her, the pieces that had moved her to tears, the moments when she'd felt truly alive at the piano. Sterling was still talking, making jokes about failed musicians and expensive mistakes, but Maya had stopped listening. She was staring at the piano, that beautiful Steinway that had been sitting silent all evening. She knew exactly what it would feel like to sit at that bench, to feel those keys under her fingers, to let the music flow through her. "So what do you say?" Sterling asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "Ready to show us what that music education was really worth? I promise we'll all be very appreciative." The way he said appreciative made it clear that he expected her to fail, that he was looking forward to watching her embarrass herself. Maya realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had ever been looked down on, every dream that had been dismissed, every time someone with power had decided to use that power to hurt someone else. She looked at Sterling, really looked at him and saw him for what he was, not a successful businessman or a generous host, but a bully who had never learned that having money didn't give him the right to treat people like toys. Maya took a deep breath, set down her serving tray on the nearest table, and walked toward the piano. The room fell completely silent, and she could feel every eye following her movement. She had made her decision, and there was no going back now. As she approached the piano bench, Maya felt a strange calmness settling over her. Sterling thought he was about to witness her humiliation, but he had no idea what he had just unleashed. She sat down at the bench, adjusted her position, and placed her hands on the keys. The moment her fingers touched the ivory, she felt like she was coming home. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands resting lightly on the keys, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. The room was so quiet she could hear the subtle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the city below. 50 pairs of eyes were watching her, waiting to see what would happen next. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Part of her wanted to stand up, apologize, and go back to serving drinks. It would be easier that way, safe. She could finish her shift, collect her paycheck, and never have to think about this moment again. But as she sat there, feeling the smooth ivory keys beneath her fingertips, something deeper stirred inside her. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts at the diner for years to pay for Maya's piano lessons. She remembered being 8 years old, sitting at their old upright piano in their tiny apartment, practicing scales while her mom made dinner after a 12-hour workday. Her mother had never complained, never made Maya feel guilty about the sacrifice. She had just smiled and said, "Play something beautiful, honey. Make all this worth it." Maya thought about Professor Williams at the conservatory, who had seen something special in her playing during her audition. He had fought to get her a scholarship, had stayed after class to help her perfect difficult passages, had believed in her talent even when she didn't believe in herself. She remembered the day she graduated, how proud he had looked, how he had told her that she had a gift that could touch people's souls, and then she thought about herself, sitting in this mansion, wearing a server's uniform, being mocked by a man who had probably never worked a day in his life for anything meaningful. She thought about all the nights she had fallen asleep to the sound of her neighbors arguing through the thin walls, dreaming of concert halls and standing ovations. She thought about the stack of rejection letters from orchestras and music venues, the student loan payments that seemed to grow bigger every month, the dreams that felt more impossible with each passing day. But mostly, she thought about the music that lived inside her, that had been her companion through every difficult moment, that had given her strength when everything else fell apart. The music that these people, with all their money and power, could never buy or understand, or take away from her. Sterling was still smirking, clearly enjoying what he thought was her moment of panic. "Take your time," he said mockingly. "I'm sure you just need to remember how to play. It's probably been a while since you've touched a real piano." Maya looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Determination, anger, and underneath it all, a quiet confidence that surprised even her. She had spent her whole life being told she wasn't good enough, that her dreams were too big, that people like her didn't get to have the things they wanted. She had been rejected by orchestras, ignored by venue managers, and looked down on by people who thought her uniform defined her worth. But sitting at this piano, she remembered something important. She was good enough. She was more than good. Enough. Maya closed her eyes and let her fingers find their position on the keys. She had played this piece 1,000 times before, but never like this. Never with this much writing on it. Never with this much to prove. She was going to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. It was a piece that required not just technical skill but emotional depth. A piece that could make grown men cry and leave audiences speechless. It was exactly the kind of piece that Sterling expected her not to be able to play. She opened her eyes and looked out at the crowd. Some of them were already starting to lose interest, probably expecting her to stumble through chopsticks or maybe a simple batch piece. Sterling was checking his watch as if he was bored by the whole thing. A few people were even starting to have quiet conversations as if the show was already over. Maya took a deep breath and placed her hands in position. She thought about every lesson she had ever taken, every hour she had spent practicing, every moment of doubt she had overcome. She thought about the music itself, the way Rachmaninoff had poured his heart into these notes, the way the piece told a story of struggle and triumph and ultimate transcendence, and then she began to play. The first notes floated into the room like a whisper, so soft and gentle that people had to strain to hear them. Maya's touch was delicate, almost hesitant, as if she was testing the instrument, getting to know it. The piano responded beautifully, its rich tone filling the space with warmth and depth. But then, slowly, the music began to build. Maya's fingers moved with increasing confidence, finding the melody that would carry the piece forward. She could feel the instrument responding to her touch, could sense the way the room was beginning to change around her. The conversation stopped, the clinking of glasses ceased. Even the catering staff paused in their work to listen. Maya lost herself in the music. She was no longer thinking about Sterling or the crowd or the fact that she was wearing a server's uniform. She was thinking about the story the music was telling, about the emotions it was expressing, about the way it could touch something deep inside the human soul. Her fingers danced across the keys with the muscle memory of years of practice, but her heart was leading the way. The piece continued to build, becoming more complex and emotionally intense. Maya's hands moved with increasing speed and precision, navigating the difficult passages with an ease that spoke of countless hours of practice. She could feel the music flowing through her, could sense the way it was filling every corner of the room, wrapping around the listeners like a warm embrace. She glanced up briefly and saw that Sterling's smirk had disappeared. He was staring at her with an expression of surprise and growing concern. Around the room, other faces were beginning to show similar reactions. People were putting down their drinks, turning to face the piano, their expressions changing from polite interest to genuine amazement. Maya smiled to herself and dove deeper into the music. This was just the beginning. She was going to show these people what real artistry looked like, what years of dedication and passion could create. She was going to prove that talent and beauty and truth couldn't be bought or sold or dismissed. With casual cruelty, the music swelled around her, and Maya felt like she was flying. Every note was perfect, every phrase was exactly where it needed to be. She had never played better in her life, and she knew that everyone in the room could feel it. This wasn't just a performance. It was a revelation. As the piece continued to build toward its first climax, Maya could sense the complete transformation of the room. What had started as a moment of intended humiliation was becoming something else entirely. It was becoming a moment of pure magic, the kind of moment that reminded people why music mattered, why beauty was important, why the human spirit could never be truly defeated, and Maya was just getting started. As Maya's fingers continued to dance across the keys, the music grew more powerful with each passing moment. What had started as gentle, flowing notes was now building into something magnificent and unstoppable. The Rachmaninoff piece was known for its emotional intensity, and Maya was pouring everything she had into every single note. The room had transformed completely. Where moments before there had been casual chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses, now there was absolute silence except for the piano. Every person in the room was transfixed, their attention completely captured by the young woman who had been serving them drinks. Just minutes earlier, Maya's hands moved with incredible speed and precision across the keyboard. Years of practice had trained her fingers to navigate even the most complex passages without hesitation. The muscle memory was so deep that she didn't need to think about where her hands were going. Instead, she could focus entirely on the emotion of the music. On telling the story that Rachmaninoff had written more than a century ago, the piece reached its first major climax, and Maya's entire body moved with the music. Her shoulders swayed slightly as she reached for the higher notes. Her face showed every emotion the music was expressing. She wasn't just playing the piano. She was becoming the music itself. The sound filled every corner of the massive ballroom. Echoing off the high ceilings and wrapping around the stunned guests, Sterling stood frozen near the fireplace, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. The smug expression he had worn just minutes before was completely gone, replaced by something Maya had never seen from him before: respect, and perhaps a little fear. He was beginning to realize that his attempt to humiliate her had backfired. Spectacularly near the windows, a woman in an elegant blue dress had tears streaming down her face. She was a music lover who rarely heard live classical performances anymore. And Maya's playing was reminding her of why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. The technical skill was impressive, but it was the emotion behind the notes that was truly moving her. A group of men who had been discussing business deals earlier were now standing in complete silence, their conversation forgotten. One of them, a man in his 60s who had made his fortune in real estate, found himself thinking about his own daughter, who had wanted to be a musician but had been talked out of it by her practical parents. He wondered if she could have played like this if they had supported her dreams instead of pushing her toward business school. Maya could sense the change in the room without looking up. She could feel the energy shifting, the way the audience was being drawn into the music. This was what she had trained for, what she had dreamed of, the ability to move people through her playing, to create moments of pure beauty that reminded everyone why art mattered. The second movement of the piece began, and Maya's touch became more delicate, more nuanced. This section was about longing and melancholy, about the quiet moments of reflection that made the triumphant passages even more powerful. Her fingers caressed the keys with the gentleness of a mother's touch, creating notes that seemed to float in the air like whispered secrets. In the back of the room, Mrs. Chun stood with her, mouth open, barely able to believe what she was witnessing. She had hired Maya because she was reliable and professional, but she had no idea that she was employing someone with this level of talent. She found herself feeling angry on Maya's behalf. Why was someone this gifted working as a server? What kind of world made it necessary for artists to hide their talents just to pay the bills? The other catering staff had stopped working entirely. They stood along the walls, their serving trays forgotten, watching one of their own do something extraordinary. Several of them had tears in their eyes, not just because of the beautiful music, but because they understood what this moment meant. They knew what it was like to be looked down on, to be treated as invisible, to have their dreams dismissed as unrealistic. Maya's playing grew more intense as the piece moved toward its final climax. Her fingers flew across the keys with lightning speed, navigating passages that would challenge even professional concert pianists. But she made it look effortless, as if the music was flowing directly from her heart through her hands and into the piano. The technical brilliance was undeniable, but it was the emotional depth that truly set her performance apart. Maya wasn't just playing notes on a page. She was telling a story about struggle and triumph, about the human spirit's ability to overcome adversity. Every person in the room could feel it, could sense the power of her conviction and the strength of her dreams. Sterling's business partner, a woman who managed investment portfolios worth billions, found herself thinking about her own journey to success. She remembered the people who had doubted her, who had tried to keep her from reaching her goals. Watching Maya's performance, she felt a deep respect for the young woman's courage and talent. She also felt ashamed of the way Sterling had tried to humiliate her. The music reached its final, thunderous climax, and Maya's entire body was engaged in the performance. She swayed with the rhythm, her face showing every emotion the music contained. The sound filled the room with such power and beauty that several people felt their hearts racing. Caught up in the intensity of the moment. As the piece neared its end, Maya allowed herself a glance at the audience. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the room was completely focused on her performance. Some had tears in their eyes, others looked stunned, and a few were recording with their phones, clearly wanting to capture this extraordinary moment. But it was Sterling's face that surprised her the most. The man who had tried to embarrass her, who had spoken to her with such casual cruelty, now looked like he had been hit by a truck. His face was red with embarrassment, and he seemed to be shrinking into himself as he realized how badly he had misjudged the situation. Maya turned back to the piano and prepared for the final passage. This was it, the moment where all the emotion and technical skill would come together in a conclusion that would leave everyone breathless. Her fingers positioned themselves for the last series of notes, and she took a deep breath. The final notes rang out through the ballroom with crystal clarity, each one perfect and precisely placed. Maya held the last chord for exactly the right amount of time, then slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was absolute and profound, as if the entire room was holding its breath. For a moment, nobody moved. The guests stood frozen, still processing what they had just witnessed. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands folded in her lap, looking out at the sea of faces staring back at her. She had done it. She had taken Sterling's attempt to humiliate her and turned it into something beautiful, something that would be remembered long after the party was over, and then, like a dam bursting, the applause began. It started with one person, then another, then suddenly the entire room was erupting in thunderous applause. People were standing, clapping, shouting their approval. Some were wiping tears from their eyes, others were shaking their heads in amazement. The sound was deafening, and it went on, as if the audience couldn't stop expressing their appreciation for what they had just experienced. The applause seemed to go on forever. Maya sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response to her performance. She had never experienced anything like this before, not even at her conservatory recitals. The sound of 50 people clapping and cheering filled the massive ballroom, echoing off the high ceilings and surrounding her like a warm embrace. Slowly, Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs feeling a bit shaky from the adrenaline and emotion of the performance. She looked out at the crowd of people who were still applauding, many of them with tears in their eyes. These were the same people who had been treating her like she was invisible just an hour ago, and now they were giving her a standing ovation. The first person to approach her was the woman in the blue dress who had been crying during the performance. She was an older lady with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She walked straight up to Maya and took her hands. "My dear," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that was absolutely incredible. I haven't been moved by a performance like that in years. You have an extraordinary gift." Maya felt tears welling up in her own eyes. "Thank you so much," she managed to say. "That means everything to me." The woman smiled and pressed a business card into Maya's hand. "My name is Catherine Rodriguez, and I run the Rodriguez Foundation for the Arts. We support young musicians who are trying to start their careers. Please call me. I would love to talk with you about opportunities." Before Maya could respond, more people were approaching her. A distinguished-looking man in his 50s stepped forward and introduced himself as Dr. Michael Chun, the director of the city's symphony orchestra. Maya's heart nearly stopped when she realized who he was. She had auditioned for his orchestra twice and been rejected both times. "I remember you from your auditions," he said, and Maya felt her stomach drop, but then he smiled. "I think we may have made a mistake. Your playing tonight was extraordinary. Would you be interested in auditioning for our upcoming season? We have an opening for a solo pianist." Maya could hardly believe what she was hearing. Yes, absolutely. "I would love that opportunity." Dr. Chun handed her his card. "Call my office next week. We'll set something up." As word spread through the crowd about what had just happened, more people wanted to meet Maya. A music producer from a major recording label asked for her contact information. A wealthy patron of the arts offered to sponsor her education if she wanted to pursue advanced training. A concert venue owner talked about booking her for a solo recital. Maya felt like she was in a dream. All these opportunities, all these people who wanted to help her, it was everything she had hoped for but never dared to expect. She accepted business cards and contact information, trying to remember names and faces while her head was still spinning from the performance, but through it all, she kept noticing Sterling. He was standing off to the side, no longer the center of attention at his own party. His face was red with embarrassment, and he looked like he wanted to disappear. Several of his guests were giving him strange looks, clearly uncomfortable with how he had treated Maya earlier. Maya overheard two women talking near the bar. "I can't believe Richard tried to humiliate that poor girl," one of them was saying. "Did you see how talented she is? He looked like such a fool." "I've always thought he was a bit of a bully," the other woman replied. "But tonight really showed his true colors. That young woman handled it with such grace." Maya felt a sense of satisfaction hearing those words. She hadn't set out to embarrass Sterling, but she was glad that people were seeing him for what he really was. More importantly, she was proud of how she had handled the situation. Instead of letting his cruelty break her down, she had used it as fuel to show everyone what she was capable of. Mrs. Chun appeared at Maya's side, her face beaming with pride. "Maya, I had no idea you were this talented. Why didn't you tell me?" "You were a professional musician?" Maya smiled sadly. "I'm not a professional musician, Mrs. Chun. I'm a server who happens to know how to play piano. At least, I was until tonight." "Well, I think that's about to change," Mrs. Chun said, gesturing to all the people who were still waiting to talk to Maya. "You might want to consider giving your notice soon." One of the most meaningful moments came when the other catering staff approached Maya. They had been watching the whole thing from the sidelines, and now they surrounded her with congratulations and hugs. These were people who understood what it meant to have dreams that seemed impossible, who knew what it was like to be looked down on by wealthy people who thought they were better than everyone else. "You showed them," said Carlos, one of the servers Maya had worked with on several events. "You showed them that we're not just invisible people. We have talents and dreams too." Maya hugged him back, feeling emotional about the support from her colleagues. "We all have something special inside us," she said. "Sometimes we just need the right moment to show it." As the evening wound down, Maya found herself alone with Sterling for a moment. He approached her hesitantly, looking more uncomfortable than she had ever seen him. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "What I did tonight was wrong. I was trying to embarrass you, and instead I embarrassed myself. You're incredibly talented, and I'm sorry I treated you that way." Maya looked at him for a long moment. She could see that he was genuinely ashamed of his behavior, but she also knew that this was probably the first time in his life that his cruelty had backfired so spectacularly. "I accept your apology," she said finally. "But I hope you learned something tonight. Just because someone is working a service job doesn't mean they don't have dreams or talents or worth. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect." Sterling nodded, looking chastened. "You're right. I promise I'll do better." Maya wasn't sure she believed him, but she was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. More importantly, she was done letting people like him define her worth. As Maya prepared to leave the party, she looked back at the piano one last time. That beautiful instrument had been her salvation tonight, the vehicle that had carried her from humiliation to triumph. She made a silent promise to herself that she would never let anyone make her feel small again. 3 months later, Maya stood on the stage of the city's premier concert hall, looking out at an audience of over 1,000 people. She was wearing a beautiful black gown instead of a server's uniform, and she was about to perform as the featured soloist with the symphony orchestra. In the front row, she could see her mother, who had flown in from Ohio, crying tears of joy and pride. The reviews of her debut performance were incredible. The local newspaper called her a rising star with extraordinary talent and emotional depth. A national music magazine featured her on their cover, calling her story an inspiration to artists everywhere. The recording of her performance at Sterling's party had gone viral online, with millions of people watching and sharing her incredible transformation. But more than the fame or the money or the opportunities, Maya was proud of something else. She had proven to herself that she was strong enough to turn her worst moment into her best moment. She had shown the world that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle, even the cruelest attempts to tear her down. As she sat down at the piano that night, ready to begin her performance, Maya smiled and thought about how much her life had changed. Sometimes the most difficult moments lead to the most beautiful outcomes.